It's 9:30. I'll call the meeting to order, and the first item of business is adoption of the agenda. Do I have a mover? Deputy Mayor.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Stewart, that the agenda be adopted as printed and circulated.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Having adopted the agenda, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof? Not seeing any. Minutes and business arising out of the previous minutes. Deputy Mayor.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Stewart, that the minutes from the November 19th, 2025 council meeting be adopted as printed and circulated.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And public meetings and drainage meetings. Can I have a resolution to go into a public meeting? Deputy Mayor.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Stewart, that the council meeting be adjourned at 9:31 a.m. for the purposes of holding a public meeting pursuant to the provisions of the Planning Act.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. So for residents watching, council is now going to sit, it looks like it's the same 5 people, but it's not. We're going to sit as a committee of adjustment to hear a minor variance application. Then we will decide on that minor variance application and then come out of committee of adjustment and still sit here, but then as council to hear planning applications for zone changes. So I will turn it over now to the planner.
Thank you, Mayor Ryan. Good morning to council staff and members of the public. The first application before committee this morning is application A1725, and it affects a property on Road 74 in the township. As shown on the screen before council committee, the proposal today is for an accessory structure on the subject property. The property itself is approximately 1.6 acres in size and does contain an existing detached garage just over 600 square feet in size. The applicants have identified on their application that they're seeking 2 areas of relief in this case, one relating to the maximum permitted cumulative gross floor area for accessory structures, which would go up to approximately 3,200 square feet total, and the second being relief for the maximum permitted height, in this case going from 5 meters to approximately 7.3 meters. Both areas of relief have been assessed, and as a result of circulation, there were no comments received from agencies or feedback received from neighboring residents. Staff, however, do look at the application. We look at the 2 areas of relief being requested. Most importantly, the gross floor area in this case being that 3,200 square feet measurement. The existing garage, just over 600 square feet in size, is appropriate as an accessory structure. However, staff do not feel that 3,200 square feet is representative of something that's minor in nature. We also do not believe that it's appropriate to classify a structure of the proposed dimensions in the application as being secondary to the principal use, which would be residential. For some context, the existing dwelling is approximately 2,100 square feet. The new proposed garage would be approximately 2,600 square feet. And the reason, as outlined in the report, that 3,200 square feet number is coming up as it's a cumulative total. So it's not just viewing the proposed garage in isolation, it's viewing it as a cumulative total because there is that existing garage. I would highlight for committee that the applicants are not interested in removing the existing garage. We did discuss that as being an option. The existing garage is in good shape, so there's not an interest at this time in removing it. I would also advise that the applicants are available to answer any questions the committee might have. But in closing, staff are not supportive of the application here today for the reasons as outlined in the report, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you. Questions from the committee for the planner? Councillor Mitchell.
So Spencer, you just talked about the existing detached garage. If, and because it's detached, that means that the this proposed building is a second accessory structure. If the existing garage was attached to the house, would that mean that the proposed structure would be the first accessory structure, and then it would be less than about 2,600 square feet, which would make it between 600 and 700 feet less over the permitted amount. So would that have an impact on this application?
Through the chair to Councillor Mitchell's question, that is correct. So the existing structure, if it were to be attached to the dwelling, would not count as accessory structure coverage, and the application would read that they're looking for relief up to 2,600 square feet rather than the 3,200 square feet. I cannot advise as to whether or not that would be appropriate. Certainly would be, as you identified, more in line with the zone provisions. However, I would suggest 2,600 square feet is still a sizable accessory structure. And in this case, I don't believe that would classify as being secondary to the residential use that exists.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the planner on the report? Not seeing any. Is the applicant here, and do they wish to speak to their application? Yes. Just make sure you hit the button and the red light comes on, and then everybody will be able to hear you.
All right. Good morning to committee and staff. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'd like to thank Spencer and Township staff for their open communication throughout this process. Though the planning report does not support the application as presented, we appreciate the constructive discussions we've had. As we don't have support of the planning staff on this application, I felt it was important to come before committee and explain our reasoning. My wife and I are seeking approval for a minor variance to allow up to 3,200 square feet of accessory building space with a maximum height of 24 feet. I'd like to take a moment to break down the requested variance and how the space would function on our property and how they meet the 4 tests the committee must consider. The purpose of the proposed building, our goal is to build a space for our young family, something functional, organized, and safe. We have several hobbies that require significant equipment, including drag racing, snowmobiling, fishing. Between a car trailer, a motorhome, snowmobile trailer, 2 race cars, a golf cart, snowmobiles, and a tractor for maintaining our property, the space fills up very quickly. To be completely transparent, my original vision was even larger, but after speaking with planning staff, we scaled back to the size we're requesting today. The proposed 2,100 square feet of enclosed garage space is tailored specifically to store these items in an orderly, weather-protected, and safe manner. In practice, even the current proposal is already over capacity, but we feel we can make it work with this variance. The porch design and intent, the open covered porch, approximately 500 square feet, is not intended for storage. When we design the building, we want something that fits a rural character of Zorra with a more country aesthetic. The covered porch gives the building that look that provides a safe, comfortable outdoor gathering space. Our family hosts friends and family often, and the covered porch is meant to be a place to cook, socialize, and enjoy the outdoors. Adding this covered area to the existing house would be difficult because of existing grading, existing trees and landscaped areas, and the driveway area. Under the zoning bylaw, this open and enclosed porch is counted towards the accessory building floor area, which is part of what pushes us above this standard. The existing detached garage, we currently have around a 600 square foot detached garage that we have invested considerable time and money into over the past 8 years and have become a functional space for us. And we would like to retain it, not for additional hobby storage, but simply to use as a regular garage for our daily vehicles and kids' accessories. If it were physically possible to attach this garage to the house in a reasonable way, we would, because then it would not count towards the accessory building area. Unfortunately, that is not feasible based on the lot configuration. Justification for the size and height, to summarize, there's 600 square feet of around 600 square feet of our existing detached garage, 2,100 square feet of proposed garage storage area, and 500 square feet of a covered porch, totaling the 3,200. The height requested 24 feet is to allow for functional roof pitch and structural design over the 16-foot main wall. This is typical for accessory buildings that need overhead clearance for trailers and motorhomes. There are multiple lots in the township with minor variances approved in the 28 to 3,100 square foot range, many of which have attached garages on their homes and do not count towards accessory area. When you factor in our existing garage which would be considered free square footage if it were attached, we're very much in line with what already exists in the community. Addressing the 4 tests, so the consistency with the official plan, the proposed structure supports an existing residential use and allows us to make functional use of our property without impacting surrounding uses. It is consistent with the character and intent of the official plan. Planning staff have indicated in the report that they are of the opinion that the size and scale of the proposed detached structure is larger than that of what typically be considered appropriate for the principal residence use of the land. To that, I asked the committee and staff to review some previous minor variance reports where staff have supported the building of a larger structure than what is proposed. Remember, the structure here is only 2,600 square feet, as we have the existing garage. Minor in nature, while the numerical increase may seem significant, the perceived impact is minimal. The building is well set back, well maintained, and will maintain rural character. This resembles similar accessory structures already permitted in the area. The variance is technical in nature, driven in part by the inclusion of the open porch and the floor area calculation of the existing structure that many other properties typically have attached to the house. In regard to staff's opinion that this application may set an undesirable precedent, I completed a quick search back through some previous meeting records and found multiple applications that staff both supported and didn't support, from 2,600 to 3,100 square feet of accessory structure that was of which many of these had attached garages to the residents already. Meeting the general intent of the zoning bylaw. The intent of the bylaw is to ensure that accessory buildings remain subordinate and do not overwhelm residential lots. Even at the size requested, the building remains clearly accessory to the dwelling and appropriate for the rural property. Desirable for the appropriate development of the land. The proposal allows us to safely store equipment inside, reducing outdoor clutter, improving aesthetics, and maintaining noise and visual impacts. The porch adds on an attractive country-style feature that blends well with the area. The building enhances the functionality of the property and will maintain the character of the neighborhood. Compliance with the bylaw to erect a structure of 1,200 square feet would not sufficiently store our equipment. In closing, we believe our minor variance represents a reasonable request that respects the intent of the township planning policy as well, meeting our family's needs. We've worked closely with staff to scale back the design and are willing to discuss potential conditions related to the existing garage to address long-term conformity if the committee would like. I respectfully ask the committee to consider the full context of the proposal and support this variance. Thanks, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks. Questions from the committee for the applicant? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you for providing some context there. I had a couple of questions, and you've answered some of them. One of the questions I had was in regards to the height, because it is a significant increase. You spoke to an exterior wall height of 16 feet. Is the 24-foot height reflective of the total peak height of the structure, or is the 24 feet the midpoint between a 16-foot exterior wall and peak?
So to be honest, for the height, I didn't completely, like, I don't have that sorted out yet. It kind of depends a little bit on what we're allowed to end up building in terms of roof peak for the structure.
Okay.
Any other questions for the applicant? Not seeing any. Thank you. Are there any members of the public here who wish to speak to the application? And nobody online, right? Okay. All right. Do I have a mover to deal with this application? Councillor Mitchell.
Moved by Councillor Mitchell, seconded by Councillor Finch, that the Township of Zorra Committee of Adjustment approve application A17-25 submitted by Harry Goosens and Kelsey Honstein for lands described as Part Lot 6, Concession 8, East Missouri, and municipally known as 742581 Road 74 in the Township of Zorra, as it relates to 1, relief from Section 5.1.1.3, Table 5.1.1.3, accessory use provisions to permit I, an increased maximum height from 5 meters, 16.4 feet, to 7.4 meters, 24 feet. And 2, an increased maximum gross floor area from 170 meters squared to 1,830 feet squared foot to 297 metric meters square to 3,200 feet square to facilitate the establishment of a detached accessory structure in a lot zone residential existing lot RE zone in the township of Zorra.
Councilor Mitchell, as the mover, do you wish to speak to that?
Yes, when I look at minor variance applications, I look at a number of factors. First one, is there any concerns from township staff or neighbors about this proposal? And in this case, there are none. Secondly, I look at lot size relative to the proposed structure. And in this case, this lot is just under 70,000 square feet. We're looking at being over the permitted amount by 1,370 square feet because of the detached garage. If the existing garage was attached to the house, that difference would only be 770 square feet. I also look at location, and that's important because all residential properties pay the same residential tax rate, regardless of where they're located in the township. But rural residents have less access to township services and infrastructure, things like recreation facilities and programs, emergency response times, paved roads, sidewalks, streetlights, etc. So the trade-off is that rural residents have a bit more flexibility in what they can do with their property because it has little or no impact on their neighbors as compared to urban landowners. And the applicant made reference to past precedents, and I'm always concerned about setting precedents, but we have set precedents on this, and the one that I researched came to mind right away when I looked at this was a decision in July 17th of 2019, a similar application from a rural existing lot. This one was 1.9 acres on the 43rd line. It contained a detached structure, and the application was to increase the gross floor area by 800 feet and the height by 3 feet. In that case, it was also not supported by the planning staff of the day for many of the same reasons that this application is not supported. And in that application, there was also no objections from township staff and neighbors. So based on that precedence and many others that have taken place between now and then, and the fact that this structure is placed on a rural lot and will have little or no impact on the neighborhood, either aesthetically or functionally, I think that we should approve this application.
Any other discussion? So the tax rate argument doesn't hold water for me because tax rate is not the only thing that sets the number of dollars of property taxes that somebody pays. There's also assessment, and rural existing and rural residential properties are generally assessed significantly lower in value than residential in villages. So, to me, it's swings and roundabouts. You pick your property and you get what you get. But I also, as somebody who lives, frankly, I live on a property that's virtually identical to this property in terms of size and, similar location, and it has a large building that would never be approved today. If I came into this room, it would not be approved. So I get all the arguments about reasonableness. But at the same time, it's hard for me to look at this and say this is minor. Like, this is not minor. It's not minor. But if we're going to approve this, as we've approved other ones where we've said this is an exception and we're going to do that, I really don't like the idea of precedent at all, to be frank, because the idea of precedent is if a council in the past approved a thing, then we should approve the thing, and if a council in the past didn't approve it, then we shouldn't approve it. In which case, why do we even have elections ever, or ever get reports on things? It should just be like, if it was ever approved, then we approve it. If it was ever not approved, then we don't. So the whole point, and I think the Planning Act is pretty specific on this, that each application is to be considered on its own merit with respect to the zoning bylaw, the official plan, and the provincial policy statement. But at the same time, if we're going to consider approving this, then we've asked people to go through, approved or not, we've asked people to go through a whole planning process, pay a fee, and go through work to get a thing approved that is significantly less variation from policy than this one. And if we're willing to consider doing this for an RE, then shouldn't we also at the same time be directing staff to consider changes to the zoning bylaw to make it so that people don't have to go through a planning process to get a thing that we're saying we're willing to approve? So to me, I'm not comfortable with approving this just as a one-off exception, because I don't see how this is that different from other ones that we have approved or haven't. So I don't know why we would want to do an exception to this if we think it's okay. I think we should do the exception and say, let's ask staff for a report on possible recommended changes to the zoning bylaw for RE and RRs for the reasons that Councillor Mitchell outlined, and frankly that the applicant outlined, that, you know, is a neighbor of this property even going to notice when this building goes up? I mean, I live in a rural area. Everybody's going to notice there's construction on the property, but at the same time, nobody's going to say, oh, there's a shadow or whatever. Like, nobody's going to care. But if we're okay with it, then I think we should change policy and not make somebody go through this process. If we're going to say, yeah, we're good with this, then let's change the zoning bylaw and make it okay, and not have people have to go through. They could just go in and get a building permit and build it. So I'm uncomfortable with the magnitude of this and not changing the zoning bylaw. I mean, if it was 2.4 feet and 32 square feet, okay, whatever. Like, minor, you know, that's a minor variance, and I think you make an exception and you roll on. This is not minor, and to me, not in the area of an exception. So I'm kind of uncomfortable with saying that it is minor and an exception when I don't think it's actually either. If we're okay with it, let's consider changing the zoning bylaw and making it okay going forward. Anyone else? Councillor Stewart.
Building off that a little bit, I think I was definitely concerned about the scale of what is, you know, what's being asked for, and not fitting the terminology of minor. But at the same time, and a lot to what you're saying, that rather than seeking, you know, any kind of precedent-setting prior justification for this request, if we're going to look at every application against a set of measurements on its own merit, that allows us the flexibility to look at a lot that's larger size, possibly the placement of something, the surrounding impacts that may or may not occur because of something, and decide whether we think it's minor. I don't know if minor always means it's a certain ratio given the limits that are there on in policy, and how far we go above that. You know, and I had a very different opinion of this about 30 minutes ago, by the way, so which is the fun part of this. But, you know, and then some parts of the planning report speak to not desirable, clearly secondary, and again, I have a hard time. I think that has to be very carefully weighed by councils when they're looking to define what's minor in a variance here. You know, is it secondary if it's, can it be secondary if it's much larger? No one would look at, I know we're talking about a residential property. No one would look at a big barn that's, you know, secondary to the house, even though it's way larger, say that that's the primary piece of that property. Given its location on the lot, the size of the lot, something larger could still appear very secondary. As in not the other part about not being desirable, again, I'd have to have a way longer list of things that define for me why something is not desirable for that type of development. So while I kind of support the idea of going a little further with, if we're willing to accept this, let's make it more of a standard. I think if we were looking at, there's something later in the agenda today about a much smaller rural residential lot being created, and I don't think we would have the same opinions of something half the size. So we have to kind of calibrate our expectations of what minor means and how far we can go above minor just in numerical terms, and look at each individual application on its own merit. Whether the baseline that currently exists is just dead wrong and we should increase it, that part I can agree that we could look at.
Anyone else? Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, this is a tricky one. So I think for myself, thinking about the existing structure being detached versus what would it be like if it were attached, the covered porch area being inclusive versus what if it wasn't inclusive. Those are spaces where I'm not looking to change policy, but I hold space for a bit of flexibility and interpretation in relation to the specific property. But once those, even with those measurements removed, we still have a structure that's in excess of what would be permitted. And where I'm particularly struggling is with the measurement tool of that alternative designs of the proposal clearly are not feasible or appropriate. And, you know, we were given a list of what this would house and that it would, you know, there's a lot of things that are going to go in it. And so from the applicant perspective, what's feasible or appropriate is by their own metrics. But I think for myself, it's thinking about what's feasible or appropriate in relation to storage of personal goods on a rural residential property. And the metrics for these structures are designed to be able to accommodate the types of things that that people may have, like an RV. So my concern is still that the size is excessive, but the other thing is with the height. And just as a reminder, the maximum permitted height is not the height of the peak of the structure, but it is midpoint between the peak and the eave. And so when we're talking about a 24-foot maximum height, what I'm struggling with is the applicant speaking to a 16-foot exterior wall height, which references accommodating normal usage of these structures. That's not what is being sought for approval, but the maximum height of the structure itself. And if the 24-foot maximum height is what is being sought to approve, I'm not seeing enough information to make me comfortable with that is required and necessary for the feasible, like for the appropriate storage of the types of things that are going in here. So my concern is still that this is just too tall, too big. But I think also I don't feel like I have enough information to really understand what it is that we are approving in terms of height, in terms of required functional height for the purpose of the usages of this building. And I didn't ask a question at the time of staff, but if there's anything that I've said here that staff would like to further speak to or clarify or correct, I would maybe open that now if that's appropriate. Is that okay?
I think if you have a question for staff, that's, yeah.
If there's anything about, like, so the exterior wall, 16-foot height in order for RV storage, like, in terms of what's permitted in our bylaw, in our zoning bylaw, that is to permit storage of these types of uses. And in going, what do we have? 2.4 meters higher in that height. The justification from the applicant is to store the things that our measurements are intended to already facilitate. So if they're going to the 7.4 meter, is that the midpoint between peak and eave, which means the actual structure could be that additional, okay.
Through the chair to Deputy Mayor's question. Yeah, with respect to the measurement, it is the midpoint between the peak and the eave. So if the applicant is requesting, in this case, 7.4 meters, and they wish to look at the designs once they get approval, should that be the case, they may end up having a peak height of 30 plus feet. We don't know. They don't know yet their design of the specific structure, but what they've applied for is to allow them to have that height of 7.4 meters or 24 feet. You are correct in saying that it's measured to the midpoint, it's not the peak. So the peak could be much higher than that 24-foot mark.
Deputy Mayor?
And I think, and so what my concern is then that if that midpoint is what we're approving, then that also means that the exterior wall, that eave point, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be 16. It could be higher as well, higher than what would be required to facilitate, say, an RV, because dependent on the design, if what we're approving is that midpoint, that exterior wall point could be any number that would be accommodated through various designs.
That's correct. I think in looking at previous applications where they've explicitly stated that it's to accommodate an RV, for example, it's not uncommon for us to see a measurement of around 21 feet. This is slightly higher at 24 feet. But in fairness to the applicant, I think, if this is the RV that they currently own or plan on purchasing, I think it would be fair to allow them the opportunity to speak to that and whether or not a measurement of 21 feet would accommodate their needs if height is of particular concern to the committee.
So we're technically past the point at which members of the public can speak to this, but if you've got like a super short factual response to that, not a persuasion, but a factual information that will help the committee, I'll allow it, but brief.
The intent is to have a 16-foot wall to accommodate a 14-foot door to get the thing in, and the additional, what I requested was taking the roof pitch, like, because we have to get half the height of the roof pitch included, I didn't know exactly what that would be, so that was the reason.
Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. So just follow up with Spencer and/or Chief Building Official, and they'll make sure you're on the right side of proceeding on this, okay? And now, council is going to, the committee, we're not going to sit as Committee of Adjustment anymore. We're now going to sit as council and hear 2 zone change applications. After we've heard both zone change applications, then we will come out of the public meeting and we will then, council will then vote on those 2 zone change applications. So I will turn it back over to the planner.
Thank you, Mayor Ryan. The application for zone change before council at this time affects lands on the 19th line in the township. In this case, the council is seeing this application come forward as a result of an associated application for consent, which has been approved by the county's Land Division Committee. The only thing I really want to highlight for council for this particular lot, which is seeking to go into a rural residential zone, is that they have requested a special provision to recognize a reduced lot depth. So the zoning bylaw requires a depth of 80 meters. The proposed RR lot would be approximately 65 meters in depth. To this end, staff are supportive of this. In particular, when we're looking at the creation of these new RR lots, the key impact we're looking at is that it's the size that is needed to accommodate the existing dwelling, the well, the septic, the laneway, etc. And in this case, the applicant himself is a farmer and is looking to ensure that the maximum amount of agricultural land is preserved. And as such, they're looking to minimize the area needed for the residential lot. So staff are supportive of it. I would also note that we did not receive any comments from area residents, agencies, or otherwise. Happy to answer any questions. And I'm not sure if Anton is here today or Dave Rowe, but I'm happy to answer any questions on their behalf.
Thank you. Questions from council for the planner on the report? Not seeing any. Is the applicant here and do they wish to speak to their application? Are there any members of the public who wish to speak to the application? Nobody online? All right then. We will, again, as I said, we will not be voting on that until we come out of the public meeting, so we're going to move on to the next planning application.
Thank you, Mayor Ryan. The next application before council affects property on Road 74 in the township. In this case, similar to the previous application, it's coming to council as a result of an associated application for consent. In this case, there are no special provisions being requested. The proposed RR lot does meet the required dimensions afforded to it in the township zoning bylaw. The one thing I would highlight is that on the screen before council, you'll see that there's an existing barn which says to be demolished. So the associated application for consent does have a condition that that barn be removed prior to this lot being created. Council will note that a comment from the building department has been included in this report speaking to the same matter. And although that is included as a condition on the consent, I did just identify in the zone change report that that is a concern of the building department, and as such, we are recommending in this case the application be approved in principle for 2 reasons. One, we don't yet have the reference plan provided and the mapping prepared for this lot to provide full support for it. And secondly, just to allow the applicant an opportunity to demolish that structure so that when that rural residential lot is created, there's no negative impacts associated with having a structure capable of housing livestock in such close proximity to it. So that's just kind of some background for council on why that structure is to be removed, both as a condition on the consent application and identified in the zone change application before council today. Happy to take any questions.
Questions from council on the report? Not seeing any. Is the applicant here, and do they wish to speak to their application?
Robert Hogg. I would ask that the Township Council here rethink the demolition of that building as part of the condition here. I have had some conversation with Mike Hughes. Mike was up just shortly after Thanksgiving. He was in the building, took some pictures. I think he came back and shared them with Spencer. I met with Mike a few weeks later, and out here in the foyer. At that time, it was Mike's, and my understanding from Mike that he didn't seem to see any reason why that building could not stay there. And so anyways, his last text that he sent to me, and I'll quote, that says, Bob, had another meeting with county. Don't think we can justify keeping the barn based on the conversation. Feeling as if we start letting the barn stay, we will be setting ourselves up for all future barns to be not torn down. So that's our last conversation that I've had with Mike on the situation. And I know in prior the variance discussion here, and I know that it was maybe different council, et cetera, but right across the road from me on the 19th, similar situation. So that property now is owned by Anton Van Maar, and so buildings there, my understanding, did not meet MDS. Mike was up and had suggested that they I guess accommodate things or change some things in the buildings to not allow any livestock to be housed in that facility, and the severance and rural residential designation was granted. So basically that facility now is the same as what I'm using mine for, and that is storage of straw and equipment. And similar to my place, that's all. That has not had livestock in it for 20 plus years. There is no water to the building, and so that's, I would ask that you reconsider that demolition proposal.
Questions for the applicant from council? Okay, so I think that I'm going to do this a little bit differently here, since if I'm understanding this correctly, I'm hearing something from the applicant that's different than the application that's in front of us. So I'm going to allow the question to staff before we do that, because I want to make sure that we get everything here before we let the applicant go. So Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, because until the applicant spoke, this was not a factor in the. So my question to Spencer is, and Bob just mentioned about this barn has not been used for livestock, and the way it's set up now, it's not possible to be used for livestock. There's no water to it. What impact does that have on our approval here with this issue still kind of up in the air? My understanding from the report was that if we approve this, we're also approving the conditions that the barn be removed. I'm open to the applicant's consideration that it be kept as storage. Is there a way that can be built into this so that the building can be kept as storage, but not as potential livestock? Because in your presentation, you mentioned that the reason it needed to be removed was because if there's a potential for livestock in there too close to this new residential lot.
Through the mayor to Councillor Mitchell's question, to be abundantly clear, what is before council today is an application for zone change, which does not have any conditions imposed upon it. We cannot move forward with conditional zoning. We don't have a regulation to do that. So what is before council today is an application which staff are recommending be approved in principle to allow for that condition to be fulfilled on the associated consent application. So one of the conditions is that it be appropriately zoned to the satisfaction of the Township of Zorra. That's what's before council today. The discussion around the structure that exists is a separate condition imposed by the county's Land Division Committee, a separate jurisdiction from the Township Council with their own decision-making process. So this council has no weight or impact on what the Land Division Committee can or can't do with their condition. We have heard this, and the applicant and his representative were at the Land Division Committee and did have the wording slightly altered with that condition. So they continue to work on that. As the applicant mentioned, he continues to work with the Township Building Department to see whether or not Township may be satisfied with some alteration to the structure in order to retain it. But that is not before council today. What is before council today is simply to approve in principle the zoning to create this rural residential lot and satisfy that one very specific condition imposed on the consent application.
So approving this does not have an impact on the barn decision?
No, it does not.
Okay, that's clarifies that. Thanks, Spencer.
I think just to further clarify, approving or not approving this cannot have an impact on whether the barn is demolished or not, because Land Division Committee, as the planner mentioned, Land Division Committee's made their decision already, and condition 4, I have it here, is that it be demolished, and we have no jurisdiction over. So whatever we do with this today is not relevant, cannot be relevant to the condition that was already placed by Land Division Committee.
But would that not have been the same condition that I mentioned about the property straight across from me on the 19th line? That would have started at the county and come down through the same thing and said that, no, this is not allowed because we got buildings that are too close to a house.
So,
And then Zorra overturned that, or changed or recommended that if we do this to the structure, whatever, so that livestock cannot be housed there, we allow those buildings to stay there. And we severed the house and the lot from the existing property then. Is that not where I'm coming from?
so the first thing is each application is, different and considered on its own merits because all those detailed reasons. But secondly, this council literally has no jurisdiction. Like a separate body, Land Division Committee, which you've already been to, said we will grant your severance if you take the barn down. And they made that approval with that condition, and we cannot change that. Like legally, there's no ability. I mean, this council can say, don't take your barn down. You still have to take your barn down because Land Division gave you the permission to sever conditional upon you taking that down. So we have there's no legal authority for this council. All 5 of us could have put our hands up and say, don't take your barn down. It still has to come down because Land Division Committee gave you the approval to sever conditional upon taking it down. So that's where we're at.
All right, thanks for your time.
Any other questions for the applicant? Are there any members of the public here who wish to speak to the application? Anybody online? All right, then, can I have a motion to come out of the public meeting? Deputy Mayor.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Stewart, that pursuant to the Planning Act, the public meeting be adjourned at 10:14 a.m. and the regular meeting of council be called back to order.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Can I have a motion? Oh, sorry, I lost my agenda here. Can I have a motion to deal with item 6B, applications at N5-25-12? Deputy Mayor.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Stewart, that the Council of the Township of Zorra approve in principle the proposed zoning bylaw amendments to place the lands described as part of Lot 6, 7, and 8, Concession 11, East Missouri, and municipally known as 195420, 19th line, Township of Zorra, into the Special Rural Residential Zone to recognize its use as non-farm rural residential lot.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And a motion to deal with 6C, ZN 5-25-13. Deputy Mayor.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Stewart, that the Council of the Township of Zorra approve in principle the proposed zoning bylaw amendments to place the lands described as West Half Lot 6, Concession 10, East Missouri, and municipally known as 742871, Road 74, Township of Zorra, into the rural residential zone to recognize its use as a non-farm rural residential lot.
Is there any discussion? I have a question for staff on this. Given that what we heard today from the applicant is slightly different than what was proposed, well, different than what we have here, is there any avenue for the applicant to pursue with land division that condition that requires they take down the barn, given that the applicant does not want to take it down but already has the permission by land division to do that? Is there any avenue for them to pursue a change in that? Not suggesting that they could get that or how they could get it, just is there an avenue for them to pursue that?
Yes, there is. But as I mentioned, the applicant and his representative were successful before County Land Division Committee in amending the specific wording on that condition, such that it now reads that the building be demolished or altered to the satisfaction of the Township Building Department. So there is still an opportunity that something may happen with that building. However, in my discussions with Township Building staff, it does not appear as though there's going to be any way that they would be able to retain that structure without significant alterations. Whether or not the applicant continues to talk to the building department and they come up with some solution to satisfy township staff, that may be an option, but the condition, which they have 2 years to satisfy to the Land Division Committee, reads such that it be demolished or altered to the satisfaction of the township. So they continue to work on that.
And as a follow-up then, if they felt that they, that as you say, they couldn't alter it to the satisfaction of the Township Building Department, is there any appeal mechanism for them to get that condition changed by Land Division?
Yes, they have an opportunity to go back to County Land Division Committee with a request that they remove the condition, and county and staff would prepare a report, in this case, advising Land Division Committee that condition should not be removed and explaining why that condition is in place, but then Land Division Committee can do with it as they choose.
The applicant could make their case and it would be up to Land Division then?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. So for both applicants there, I guess there's only one applicant here. I think you heard the answers to the question there. You know, there's options to you. Your zone change has been approved by council, so that's that, and that's done. If you want to pursue that, I would encourage you to work with Chief Building Official on, is there alterations that, would satisfy him and would satisfy you? And if that's not the case, you do have the option to go back to Land Division Committee and attempt to have it removed. That's frankly up to the Land Division Committee whether they want to remove that or not, and that'd be a whole separate process there. But those are two avenues for you to attempt to get out of the process what you would like to get out of the process. And next we are at delegations. Item 7A, Stephanie Radu, Curator, Beachville and District Museum. Just, you've done this before, but make sure the red light is on and we'll hear you. Also, I mean, I love it when people stay for council meetings, and I really encourage you to stay and hear all the interesting business that's going on, but also applicants for planning. You're free to come and go. This is your chamber and your council. You're free to come and go as you want. You could always come back later if there's something on the agenda that you like, or come another time. I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Vidu.
Good morning, everybody. This is one of our opportunities to be in front of council and speak a little bit to plans for the museum for next year. Already into December is a lot of planning going on, and so the material that I'm presenting to you today comes out of the work of the Budget Committee and the Board of Directors of the museum. The format remains somewhat similar to past years, so we start off with a revenue section that outlines a lot of our grants that are applied for and received, both for staffing and for various operational pieces, including then several of our revenue streams that involve our programs and events, and then any transfers from reserve investments that are required to balance the budget. Just in looking at this section, one of the things I want to draw out is that our budget this year has seen substantial growth as a result of two main areas, one being a capital project that would involve climate controlling our barn. This has been on the radar for the board as well as both townships for a number of years dating back to 2019. And then the other piece would be additional wages and payroll items that I'll discuss in the presentation here and that are outlined in the notes that I submitted. But what I want to emphasize with revenue here is that the museum has experienced quite a bit of growth as far as its revenue generation through programs and events. And so you'll notice in most of these lines in the revenue section that we are expecting additional funding to come in through those avenues as well as through some of the grants that we see year after year. The one piece there for the transfer from reserves is about $23,000, which again emphasizes the museum's interest in seeing the capital project completed and some of the rising costs that we're experiencing as a result of changing costs for supplies and labor, tariff impacts, service costs, etc. So it's meant to just be a way to kind of support all of those projects and changes. Moving into the administration line for expenses then, if we're looking through, we do see some additional cost savings as a result of having switched over to an internet phone. We are asking for a new desktop computer setup for our office setups. Last year we had 5 staff during the summer working off 3 computers, so this is something that we've added into the 2026 budget to make sure that that doesn't occur again when we have our peak season and our summer staff with us. We also have additional costs in the bookkeeping line as a result of the growth that we've seen in increased activity, both as far as just program registrations and transactions at the gift shop and additional invoicing and whatnot. So those bookkeeping costs are a little bit up from last year. In addition, we did see some cost increases handed down to us through Able Pest Control, which does our pest control at the museum, both inside the museum and outside, and some additional costs rising through Security One alarm monitoring. So those have all been factored in by the budget committee in this budget that we're seeing here. The one line that is a bit new to our budget is the service charges in this section, and that really is meant for us to be able to get a more accurate picture of the charges that are being pulled off of our online transactions and our debit and credit transactions by the platforms that allow us to pursue those types of payments. So you're seeing that recorded here, and hopefully helps our budget committee continue to be informed on budgeting for those charges. So moving into the curatorial section then, there's only minor changes as far as the overall curatorial expenses for the museum this year, but there are some areas that are really shifting, and so we're keeping an eye on those. One being that our volunteer base has grown quite substantially over the last 2 years, and so the ability to host and train and recognize those volunteers is really important to us as we grow that volunteer base. We have over 2,700 volunteer hours documented for this year to date, and that had over 90 volunteers that we had invited to our recognition event this year, and so the budget needs to increase to make sure that we're properly supporting those volunteers. And the other piece in this area is we have seen a lot more opportunities for outreach with the museum. We've had a lot more invites to local events across Oxford County, so doing some of that outreach requires a bit more expansion of the budget. And the other piece is some of our conservation lines. That conservation line, although it stays the same, is something we're keeping an eye on because most of our conservation supplies are sourced through a Canadian company that sources out of the US. So there's some changes as far as our ability to actually get a hold of those conservation supplies and monitor our budget for that. So then we're moving on to the payroll wages section, which again, as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, is one of our key areas that the Board of Directors have been working on this year. Both of our full-time staff members' contracts this year are up at the end of December. And in addition to that, as I explained in the notes for the presentation here, we've seen a lot of shifting terrain with regards to our provincial and federal staffing grants or youth employment grants. So this section really is the result of, and the figures in this section are the result of quite a lot of work on behalf of the Board of Directors, our compensatory committee, and a third-party consulting firm, which is Ward and Updegrove. It's the hope that the museum, through the work that's been done this year, will be able to align our compensatory strategies with those of both of the townships that support our wage lines through our funding agreement. So that was really key. And the Board of Directors, in looking at the compensatory strategy, have looked at meeting the market data that we were presented by Ward and Updegrove. And so that ideally aligns really with the philosophy, the pay philosophies and strategies of both townships. Moving into the maintenance line, one of the key areas here that we saw changes in is our lawn and grounds maintenance. Those rising costs are part of contracts that are negotiated through Southwest Oxford Township. We also had support from SWOC's staff to do an energy audit this year that ideally will help us in 2026 become a little bit more energy efficient. And then we're obviously seeing the changing costs with regards to garbage tags and new recycling programs. And so those there's been an effort here to capture some of that as we put forward a 2026 budget. And then the second large section as far as expenditures this year would be our long-term projects, following specifically on the capital planning piece, which would involve renovations to our north barn on the property. The barn project is a very significant project for our museum. Not only does it attend to the fact that these buildings have been there for 30 years, they are not climate controlled, and therefore they're not accessible to a visiting public through most of the year when weather kind of gets a bit colder. In addition to that, the artifacts that have been stored in those barns have remained outside of climate control environment, and so the goal is to see that the artifacts that can be moved in there are properly preserved, cared for, and that the visitors and guests have access to that space year-round. But in addition to that, it's an option for us to really keep the infrastructure up to standards and not have to pursue something like an additional build. And so this is a very important project. It also ties into the ISIP grant that was awarded to the museum, which brings provincial and federal funding towards this project. So we are looking to get the barn renovation completed in its entirety in 2026, according to engineered drawings that the board is reviewing right now from SPH Engineering. And again, ideally, provided that we are able to get that project significantly completed, then there will be some funds, claims made and some funds returned from the province and the federal government for that project, which are outlined in the blue section of the budget that's here as well. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to take those now.
Thank you. Questions from council? Councillor Mitchell.
Hi, Stephanie. It's question on revenue, and I noticed that admission to the actual museum is by donation only. So the line in the revenue page, there's 3,200 actual to date donations, budgeting 1,800. Is that all from people visiting the museum, or are there other donations in there?
There are two larger donations that have been made there for targeted purposes. So someone who, we had a sponsor through our car shows that were sponsoring the production of t-shirts for our volunteers. That was a $600 donation, but that 3,200 otherwise is feet through the door, people leaving donations in our admission box, yes.
Okay. Do you track how many people visit?
Yes, yeah, that's a very important metric for us. So, and I try to report that quarterly when I deliver our quarterly reports, because it is a significant metric for us, one that has to be submitted with all of our grant applications. We saw over 4,000 visitors last year, which is the highest I've seen in my 7 years there. We typically hover just around 2,400, between 2,000 and 2,400 in the last 7 years that I've been there. And so last year showed significant growth as far as usage of the site, participation in the programs, and admittance to the museum building itself. So,
So has there ever been in consideration of charging admission? I know there would be extra cost involved in staffing and then doing that. I just wonder if it had ever been discussed.
Yes, it has been discussed almost on an annual basis as far as our board of directors. We do rely on data that we collect from the Elgin Oxford Norfolk Museum Association and many of our partners, friends, network, colleagues that do continue to charge admission at other similar museum types and look at the revenue that they generate and the average cost as far as admission that they're charging. Our donations tend to surpass what we might make if we were asking for a donation of that type, or an admission cost at that type, excuse me. In addition to that, there's been a lot of conversation about the fact that, both townships provide funding as far as the grants, the operating grants, and so we prefer to see some of the charges that we do pass on to our visitors and users being for those who are participating in additional programs. So our summer camp is charged, our school groups are charged, our car shows are all done by donation and generate revenue in that way. We have sponsorship campaigns that we run for events like Light Up the Museum that bring in a lot of funding through local businesses and groups and families. And so it's felt that those are more significant as far as generating revenue than it would be just charging for coming into the museum to see what we have. Certainly we want to remain accessible for people who have an interest in Zorra Townships and Southwest Oxford Townships histories. And so that's all been part of the conversation, I believe.
Okay, it's good to know the conversation there, but I think basically what you're saying is charging admission for many reasons would do more harm than good.
Yeah,
Like
I
from a
think,
revenue source and other reasons.
yes, it may hinder traffic numbers. It may hinder people's ability to learn about other services and programs that we do offer. And the revenue that could be gained there is not as significant as, say, can be gained from other areas of our museum operations.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Stewart.
A question, just because it's a follow-up to the number of visitors, but I wonder if you could just quickly elaborate on the content on the website as well, because that reaches a broader audience as well, so not just through the door type visits, but you guys have done a lot of work with the online content, so I wonder if you could just highlight that for a quick sec.
Yeah, we see in the museum field and in arts and culture sector in general, ever since the pandemic, there's been a lot of encouragement for generating digital content, making collections available digitally, continuing to engage with audiences that are not necessarily in our geographic areas. So there has been quite a lot of effort to expand our audiences across various social media platforms, but as Councillor Stewart mentioned, also through our website. What we do know, and this is something that continues to be reinforced through surveys in our sector, but also through an existing strategic planning community survey that we have out now, is that, someone coming through the doors of the museum isn't the only way to support the museum, and there's a lot of people who will never step foot in our museum that have a lot of support for the work that we do. One of the things we see in our community survey is that one of the most highly valued contributions museums make is the preservation of local history. And so many people who don't ever come to the museum will still, when surveyed, answer that that is a really important piece that they want to see done in their community, and that remnants of local organizations here or family heirlooms, that they have a place to go, that they will be preserved and that they can be made accessible for future generations. So the feet through the door is not always the best measure of our value, and certainly not the best measure of the value the community places on the institution either. So it's a very important metric that is regularly collected by those who are looking to support our institution, but it is very important to have that scope and understanding that the work that we do, even with the artifacts that we care for, that is somewhat behind the scenes, and people appreciate that even if they're not coming to see us do that work in person. Yeah.
Any other questions? Thanks for everything you do.
Thank
I don't
you.
get there as often as I used to, but I love the baseball once a year. And I'll see you on Friday night, right?
December
Lighting
5th,
the
yes,
lights.
6:30, we're doing Light Up the Museum. Everybody is more than welcome to join us for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is item 7B, delegation from Southwestern Public Health regarding household food insecurity, and Marcia Van Wiley. And I know you've been here before. Just make sure the red light is on and go for it.
Good morning, Mayor Ryan and members of council. My name is Marcia Van Wiley. I'm a program manager at Southwestern Public Health. And with me, I have Randy Gregoire here today. She's a public health nurse with a focus in health equity and poverty reduction. And we are pleased to be with you here this morning and to speak a little bit about household food insecurity and share some local strategies for implementation. So every day, many households in our community are struggling to put enough food on the table. The term household food insecurity refers to a situation where households do not have consistent access to nutritious, safe, and culturally preferable foods. And this is primarily related to financial constraints. And one thing I wanted to note about household food insecurity is that that measure is at the public health unit level. And so in the Southwestern Public Health region, so Oxford County, Elgin County, and the City of St. Thomas, in 2023, a staggering 1 out of 4 households were experiencing household food insecurity. So when we think about who is most vulnerable for household food insecurity, there are a few key factors that we look at. So on this slide, you can see a graph that shows the relationship between income and food insecurity. So total income is the main factor. So those living with low income or who have unreliable income, which is often associated with precarious work, or have other financial constraints, are more likely to experience household food insecurity. The other piece is a strong predictor of household food insecurity is those who rely primarily on social assistance as a source of income. And so we do know that individuals and families who are receiving social assistance are experiencing much higher rates of food insecurity. And then finally, affordability of housing is a key factor. So as we know, we're in a current climate where housing affordability is of great concern. And the measure that we use to determine whether housing is affordable is that 30% of either mortgage or rent costs are about 30% or less of your before tax income. So household food insecurity is a significant public health issue, and that's because it's related to negative health outcomes. We know that across the lifespan, individuals from food insecure households are experiencing poor physical and mental health overall. In children and youth, we understand that rates of mental illness are higher, reports of depression, anxiety, and thoughts of suicide. We also know there's a link between behavioral and developmental problems. In adults, we see higher rates of chronic diseases such as diabetes and heart disease, more hospitalizations, and lower life expectancy. So that brings us to the focus of this conversation. Southwestern Public Health has been in collaboration with the Ontario Dietitians in Public Health to create a resource that has local evidence-based strategies to address household food insecurities. So this resource divides the strategies into those that are specific to income, which we know is the main driver of household food insecurity. And then there are some strategies outlined as well that are more focused on affordability, which we know doesn't have a direct impact on rates of household food insecurity, but does reduce the financial constraints on individuals and families. I'm gonna hand it to Randy.
So within the report, there are 9 different recommendations that municipalities can consider to decrease rates of household food insecurity locally. So the first strategy is about raising awareness around household food insecurity and its connection to income. So as Marcia mentioned, the first strategy is less about policy and more about kind of how we frame the issue. So the way that we understand a problem is ultimately going to impact the solution that we bring forward to solve that problem. So shifting the framing of household food insecurity from a matter of food access, individual behavior, more towards one rooted in inadequate incomes and systemic poverty. So this helps really align our collective efforts when we're partnering together as communities. So the second strategy within the primer is to create or support a municipal poverty reduction strategy. So these strategies are tailored to local needs, but complement those broader provincial or federal efforts, and they provide coordinated frameworks to address issues like food and housing insecurity in our communities. So Zorra can support connections through the Social Planning Council of Oxford and really share the local perspective and data to highlight what needs are being brought forward by your constituents, and really aligning funding and efforts towards poverty reduction as a community. The third recommendation is providing leadership or support to local food insecurity and poverty reduction partnerships. So along the same line, it's strengthening collaboration in those local partnerships and networks, because the more we work together, the more we're able to move forward. And with that, Reducing Poverty Together, they do have active working groups in food security, access to services, housing, and living wage. And I think the important consideration here is really making sure that that Zorra voice is heard at the table. So joining in those partnerships, supporting efforts where possible, providing funding for specific initiatives, or even something along the lines of admin support. The fourth recommendation is to support living wage certification. So the living wage within our region currently is $21.05 as of November 10th, where we know the minimum wage currently in Ontario is $17.60 per hour. This represents a difference in about $3.45 per hour for individuals who are living on minimum wages. And we know that that can have a significant impact on the bottom line and affordability. So living wages are calculated yearly for 10 different economic regions in Ontario, considering cost of living in those particular areas. So municipalities can consider becoming certified living wage employers themselves, encouraging local businesses to become certified living wage employers, and providing support for local businesses who choose to do so through things like public recognition, practical guidance, or marketing incentives. And just to note, the Township of Blandford-Blenheim recently became certified this past summer. They did mention that there wasn't a significant increase because a lot of staff at the township were already being paid above the living wage. However, they did increase rates of pay for crossing guards and summer students through that program. So the fifth recommendation is supporting free income tax filing clinics for households who need them the most. So filing income tax is essential to being eligible for different subsidized housing, receiving government funding credits, etc., and it really gets more dollars into the hands of households who need them the most. So what municipalities can do to support free income tax clinics is promoting clinics, supporting with volunteer recruitment, offering space, supporting systems navigations or linking folks with those clinics, or coordinating or expanding clinics to provide additional services or supports at the same time, and ultimately sharing information with constituents about the benefits of tax filing to make sure that they're getting all of the credits they're able to receive. The next two recommendations are more about advocacy efforts with provincial and federal governments. So current provincial income supports, including Ontario Works and Ontario Disability Support Program and minimum wage, often fall short of meeting people's basic needs. An important part for the municipality is engaging in conversations around aligning minimum wages with living wages, increasing the rates of Ontario Works and Ontario Disability Support Program to more be in line with the cost of living, indexing Ontario Works to inflation, and engaging in dialogue around basic income. So an important part for your municipality is really understanding the perspectives of those who are accessing those support systems within Zorra, and understanding what their needs are and how we can bring their voices forward. And the recommendation number 7 is participating in the conversations at the federal level. So current federal income support, so the Canadian Child Benefit and the Canada Disability Benefit, may not fully meet the needs of households who are living with low income. So it's important to engage in conversations around expanding the Canadian Child Benefit for those living in low income, and enhancing the Canadian Disability Benefit, including automatic enrollment and increased benefits amounts. And then encouraging the government to explore basic income models and feasibility around what that could look like for Canada. And as Marcia mentioned, the last two recommendations are more about general affordability to free up household income to put towards healthy and nutritious foods. So when we implement these alongside those income strategies, then they can help to ease that financial strain that families see. So housing is one of the largest expenses for most households. So when a significant portion of income is going towards rent, housing, or mortgage payments, it really leaves less for those essentials as well. So some of the strategies that municipalities can consider, and I saw that these are already reflected to some extent within your strategic plan, is really encouraging that diverse housing types and densities, which is reflected there. So thank you for having that alignment. And then, of course, participating in conversations around rent control, vacancy control, and tenant protection, which really helps to keep people into the housing that they're already in. And the last recommendation is improving affordability of accessibility of local public programs and services. So different options here around like public transit. So what is the unique transit concerns or barriers that people in Zorra are facing? And how can we have those voices heard? And how can we address those barriers through unique or innovative rural approaches? Affordable and accessible childcare options. I've seen this reflected as well with the YMCA space opening up. And that allows families to return to the workplace where they're able to earn more income for their home. System navigation support. So oftentimes a municipality is the first place where people may come to with questions. So being able to provide support to get people connected to the resources they may need. And then co-location of services, so making sure supports and services are accessible to folks within the community.
Thank you very much. Just before we take questions, I wanted to make note that this presentation was prepared by a registered dietitian named Kendall Chambers, who unfortunately wasn't able to be with us here this morning, but wanted to make sure we gave her that credit as a major contributor.
Thank you. Questions from council? Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, recommendation number 5, support free income tax filing clinics for households who need them the most. And the federal government recently announced that they were going to change things so that the revenue agency was going to automatically file income taxes for lower income people, with the same goal here that people that were falling through the cracks would be in the system and potentially qualify for government. Has that announcement there been any information filtered down to your level of how that's going to be implemented? Or are you continuing with implementing the free tax clinics until we find out more what the new legislation means?
So the free tax clinics would be accessible to kind of anyone with a modest income within the community. It's my understanding that with the automatic tax filing that it will be a kind of a rollout type of process. And I know that there will still be consent that's required for individuals to consent to be part of that process. And I believe the way that it works now is that individuals are invited to use a simple file to automatically put their tax, to file their taxes. So we will keep an eye on kind of what is happening in that and may adjust this recommendation. But at this time, it's really important to have those community spaces where people may have questions about their taxes and can access those professionals.
I would just also add that Oxford County already offers free income tax filing clinics at the Oxford County Administration Building in Woodstock.
And one of the criticisms I heard about the new government plan is that if people have never filed taxes, then they're not in the system at all, and automatic filing doesn't help if the revenue agency doesn't know that you even exist. So this program still has some value going forward, I think.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. That's my third time hearing it, I think, and I get some value out of it every time. Thank you. Next up is item, I lost my place here. 7C, Top Aggregate Producing Municipalities of Ontario Organization Activity Updates. Executive Director Don McLeod. Mr. McLeod, just in case you're unfamiliar with Zorra Township, I just wanted to...
So I will assume that council's read the presentation. I don't need to go through it page by page. Yes. So on behalf of TAPMO, I'd like to thank council, staff for having our delegation today. Deputy Mayor Gregg is one of our executive committee members and has been a key participant in preparing for our 2026 initiatives that the executive committee has adopted. So just to provide a little bit of background for those of you that don't know, TAPMO is the top aggregate producing municipalities of Ontario. It has been around for about 6 years, and Zorra was one of the founding members. It did start out initially as the top 10. We've now expanded that to encompass 36 municipalities province-wide. We've grown the membership by 2 members lately, and part of the outreach of the executive director is to reach out to municipalities that are not members and trying to recruit them to join us. The mandate, when I do my delegations, one of the things that I do stress is that TAPMO is not against aggregate extraction. We are there for fair aggregate extraction and to make sure that municipalities, the ratepayers, are being protected as best as possible by the Ministry of Natural Resources and that the industry is practicing their best practices. So it's a fine line because we do get calls about site-specific issues, and to this point in time, TAPMO has not taken an interest in any site-specific issues in our member municipalities. So it's a fine line we walk. What we do is provide any information or data to the members that may assist them in aiding their ratepayers. So the 4 key tenets that that TAPMO was looking at: fair taxation, greater collaboration, fair aggregate levy, and fair extractive licensing. So the fair taxation is one that was undertaken about 3 years ago, probably 4 years ago now, with appeals of aggregate assessments. Wellington County worked with TAPMO and they led the charge to appeal assessments province-wide on aggregate operations. That worked its way through the Assessment Review Board, the Divisional Court, and finally to the Court of Appeal. And all of the appeals from the aggregate industry were unsuccessful, and we had since seen an increase in aggregate assessments for any aggregate producing municipality. So that was a real win. We're not there yet fully. I would say it's a halfway step where we should be, but it was a good start. And it did provide Zorra with, I believe, about an additional $300,000 in aggregate assessments. So as the 6th largest producing municipality, it was a good win for Zorra. Greater collaboration. We do have outreach to key provincial officials. I meet quarterly with the Assistant Deputy Minister. Our board chair is meeting with the Minister's office very regularly. In the past, we have used a government relations firm, Sussex, that has been able to get us key meetings with stakeholders across the province, and that's been very successful to this point. It's allowed us to build our relationships to a point now where we're not engaging Sussex for the upcoming year unless any major initiatives come out from the province where we will need them. The fair aggregate levy, we did see an increase about 4 or 5 years ago. It has gone up by CPI every year since that point. It's still not to a point where it needs to be. For any of the delegations that I have made to this point, every municipality says the same thing. It's not high enough and needs to be higher. The cost of rehabilitating roads has skyrocketed. It's gone up way more than CPI, and the levy is just not at a point where it fully pays back municipalities for what they're spending on road upkeep on the haul roads. So that is going to be something that we will be working on in 2026, starting negotiations with the province to see if there's any movement for the increase in the aggregate levy. Finally, the extractive licensing. I think the bottom paragraph states it very clearly. By adopting a review and approval process that is fair and reliable, we can improve the consultation and application review process for both industry and municipalities. It's a long, cumbersome process, and municipalities are having to spend lots of money peer reviewing. Zorra was proactive in putting a large application fee in for zoning applications, so that helps. Not every municipality is there, and they're not getting the full value for their residents they need to in carrying out peer reviews. Advocacy, as I mentioned, I do hold meetings with senior ministry staff, the minister's office, as well. We have delegations at AMO and Roma. We are starting outreach to our member municipalities, such as the delegation today. I've had 4 over the last 4 weeks. I just had an outreach from the Western Wardens Caucus, so I will be making a presentation in February. So some of the 2026 initiatives that the board adopted last meeting, I won't go through them slide by slide because you've all had a chance to read them, but I'm really excited about this because we have brought on board Alyssa Goss. She is a public relations specialist. She's going to help redesign the website. There's going to be policies, procedures put on the website for member municipalities. We will increase our social media presence. It's virtually non-existent at this point, and we've done a very poor job. So it's something that we will increase our presence on. As well, she will be creating a LinkedIn page. That's a platform that we've not used before, and according to Alyssa, it's extremely popular right now. So she thinks that will be a real win for us to get a good LinkedIn page. The digital and social media campaign, that is going to be pushed out probably second quarter. And finally, the creative content and resources portal, that will likely be the end of 2026 or early 27. And that's where we will build a database of policies, best practices, and toolkits for our local, our member municipalities that they will be able to access. There should be some downloadable templates, motions, press releases, objection letters, as well as infographics and videos. So Zorra data, I really don't need to stress this too much, but Zorra is the 6th largest producing municipality in Ontario, and if you look at it from lower tiers, it's the 3rd largest. This year, for some reason, they've grouped Zorra with East Zorra, Tavistock, and Norwich in the production statistics, but it still shows 5.6 million tones in the interim statistics that were released in August. Overall, Oxford County produced 8.2 million tones and was the 5th highest producing upper single tier and accounted for almost 5% of the materials produced in Ontario. One interesting point, Zorra's licensed area is equivalent to 25% of the land mass of Mississauga. So it's an incredible amount of land that is already licensed, and there's more coming on. So the province has undertaken a supply and demand study. Right now it's showing that there is more than an adequate supply across the province for the anticipated growth that's set for the next 10 to 15 years. However, that does not play a part in licensing new pits. The PPS is very clear that demand is not to be taken into account. So Zorra could have another doubling or tripling of the land designated, and from that point, there's nothing that the municipality could do by saying there's already enough supply. So it's going to be very concerning, especially for those municipalities around the GTA, where they're seeing a greater demand than we are in southwestern Ontario. So at that point, Mr. Mayor, I would leave it open for questions from council or staff.
Thank you. Questions from council for the delegation? Councilor.
Good to see you again, Don, and it's good to question you again. Couple of questions. One on the aggregate levy, and you said that it gets increased by CPI, and one of the roles of TAPMO is to try to get the levy increased. What is the levy per ton right now, and is there a formal mechanism to have it increased, or is it just a lobbying effort of the minister, or whichever minister's in charge of aggregate?
I think it is 8.6 cents per ton, but I'll confirm that and send it out to you.
Okay.
To this point, there is no working group looking at the aggregate levy. It's something that TAPMO was just going to start again. So as part of that background work, we will be reaching out to members to see if we can get some costs that any public works departments have used in costing of repairs for gravel roads.
Okay, so it's basically a lobbying situation. There's not a formal
correct
way of having that addressed. The other one is the funding of TAPMO, and I remember 2 or 3 years ago, TAPMO reached out to membership, and at that point they were looking to hire some people, some staff specifically for TAPMO, and they were looking for a commitment from members to fund that position. And I think we approved in principle a certain amount. And I don't recall it ever coming back that we actually included that in the budget. So TAPMO has increased membership, so I presume that position that they talked about at that time is the one that you're filled. Also, you mentioned that you're hiring a marketing expert. So is TAPMO, the finances of TAPMO, sufficient right now to provide the staffing required without an extra top-up that they were looking at 2 or 3 years ago?
That's correct. I think there was 4 or 5 municipalities province-wide that each kicked in $25,000 to hire a part-time executive director, which is the position. The maximum fee that a lower tier pays right now is $5,000, and that's all based on your previous year's production statistics. So Zorra would be $5,000. At this point, the budget that we're levying based on our 36 members is covering all our expenses. And because the last 2 years we didn't use the full executive director's salary, there's still a little bit of reserve built up. So there is a bit of a cushion should any issues come up where we need to engage Sussex.
That's good to know that, you know, this is all great work that you're doing, but if there has to be some finances behind it to make it work. So
At this point, it is sustainable.
that's good. Thanks, Don.
Any other questions? Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, Don, thanks for this presentation, and I agree with all these initiatives. The one thing that I thought of when reading through is the rehabilitation of former closed pits. And just because we have a lot close to villages, and then we have a lot that's that's licensed on prime farmland, how much of a focus does TAPMO have, or do you think could have, on helping that? I don't know a lot about the process of rehabilitation and the timelines that aggregate licensors are required to fulfill those, but they're a big impact long-term to our communities, and I just wonder what kind of focus TAPMO has towards that.
Sure. So all of those existing pits that would have rehabilitation plans. The more recent ones have something called progressive rehabilitation, where the operators have to rehabilitate as they go along. Some of the older pits, it's not required until end of life of the pit. So it all depends on the licenses that are out there. They all have rehabilitation plans. Number one is always rehabilitated to farmland where practical. So if it's a below water pit, obviously they can't, but for the majority of the pits in Zorra, they're above water and they are slated to be rehabilitated back to farmland. It is something monitored on the compliance assessment report that the operators file on a yearly basis with the ministry and also with the township. So the acreages that they rehabilitate on a yearly basis are noted on there. I know at one time we did a review of that just to see how much was actually being rehabilitated. So it's not a real onerous task. There's probably about 55 reports that are filed in Zorra, so it would be a quick tolling just to see how much is being rehabilitated on a yearly basis. For best practices moving forward, that's where we will hopefully get some best practices from other municipalities, what new licenses should have included in their site plans as far as rehab goes. The ministry does seem to be fairly stringent on enforcing progressive rehab. They have hired 105 new inspectors province-wide that are being rolled out. So we have been told that enforcement and site visits will be increasing over the next couple of years.
So it's a bit of a follow-up monitor type situation over the next couple of years to see if the province does follow through on that and if the results of that are getting good results in terms of full rehabilitation and honoring the requirements.
That's correct, yes. So the Auditor General's report from 3 years ago, that was one of the things highlighted, that rehabilitation wasn't being carried out, and it was likely due to lack of enforcement, so that's why they've hired the 105 new inspectors.
Anyone else? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
So we'll go on now to 8, reports from Public Services Department. On 8.2A, Recreation and Facilities Division, report 2025-115 from the Manager of Recreation and Facilities regarding the Q3 Recreation and Facilities report. Manager Caldwell, is there anything you would like to highlight for council before I ask them for questions?
Good morning. Yes, I would just like to highlight that we're very thrilled that this upcoming holiday season, all 14 of our public skates have been picked up by local sponsorships. So that ranges from minor sport teams, local organizations, and businesses. And just this week, we also had our sensory-friendly skate that we're piloting in both locations picked up by a sponsor. So lots of great opportunities for families to get out with their kids over that long school break.
Questions from council on the report? Not seeing any. Do I have a mover? Councillor Stewart.
Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that report 2025-115 from the Manager of Recreation and Facility be received and filed for council information.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And item 9, reports from Corporate and Protective Services Department. 9.2, Building Drainage and Bylaw Services, report 2025-128 from the Drainage Superintendent regarding a drain petition for improvement to the Slater drain. Director Martin, is there anything you want to highlight for council?
No, thank you.
Questions from council on the report? Do I have a mover? Councillor Stewart.
Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that council receive and adopt the drainage petition signed by Stuart Slater, property owner of part lots 33-34, concession 10, East Missouri, known as 157030 15th line, under section 78 of the Drainage Act 1990 for improvement to an existing drain works.
Is there any discussion? Councillor Mitchell.
Just a quick comment. I got a kick out of the map that's included in this, and it shows how much things have changed. The drainage department has all kinds of these drainage maps, some of them going back over 100 years, and they're pretty neat to look at. But this particular one, I knew some of these landowners when I first moved to the area. They're all deceased by 20 or 30 years. The railway line that's in there has been gone for 30 years. The 100 highway was then Highway 19 and is now County Road 119. And this map was drawn exactly 1 year to the day before I was born, so it is a historic document.
Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 9.3, Financial Services. A, report 2025-131 from the Deputy Treasurer Financial Analyst regarding 2025 financial results. Manager Grogan, is there anything you want to highlight for council?
Nothing at this time.
Questions from council on the report? Not seeing any. Do I have a mover? Councillor Stewart.
Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that report 2025-131 from the Deputy Treasurer Financial Analyst be received and filed for information purposes only.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 9.3B, report 2025-130 from the Manager of Financial Services Treasurer regarding the 2026 budget. Manager Grogan, is there anything you want to highlight for council?
The only thing I'd like to actually add to the report is, since the writing of the report, we have received the 2026 assessment roll from MPAC and have confirmed the 2026 growth figure of 0.99%. Happy to take any questions.
So just before I ask council if they have questions, didn't you estimate that it would be 0.99?
Correct.
So how,
We
not intending to be disrespectful, but how did you do that?
We do see preliminary 2025 end-of-year numbers that are posted on MPAC's Municipal Connect website. So we use those as kind of our targets. 9 times out of 10, your roll is going to be returned with those actual numbers. So there's not as much guesswork that needs to go into it as it appears.
Questions from council on the report? Not seeing any. Do I have a mover? Councillor Stewart.
Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that report 2025-120 from the Manager of Finance Treasurer be received and filed for information purposes only.
Is there any discussion? I just want to make a few comments when we pass budget. I always feel like we should. You know, I know to residents a lot of the time it can sort of seem like, you know, services just happen, right? Like the road just gets plowed and that's the way that it is. But it doesn't just happen that way. It happens because every year you know, council gives direction to staff to prepare a draft budget, and then council considers that budget and decides whether to pass it or not. And that's how, you know, the ice in the arena gets frozen and the fuel gets put in the plows and the firefighters get paid and all those things. And I think, you know, when I look at this budget coming in at, I think, 3.08, I think was the final number we ended at in terms of the rate. For me, I always look sort of as a starting point in my mind, I look at what the CPI was for the year and sort of the what's the other one called? The construction building price index, where they're at. And I sort of think that's always a good guide of reasonableness in preparing a budget. Certainly some of the things that municipalities buy increase by significantly more than that, you know, in recent years, heavy equipment in particular. And I think that when I look at the initiatives that are in this budget, the service levels that are in this budget, and the resultant tax rate that we're looking at, I think this is a very, very responsible budget. I've certainly talked to a lot of residents over the last month about that. It looked like we're going to come in at 3 point something, and everybody that I talked to thought that it was one-on-one thought that it was a reasonable number, given the price pressures that they're seeing in their own life and in their own businesses and things like that. And I still think that it is good. I'm very, very comfortable with this. And it's, you know, in the context of discussions that I've had with the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing about municipalities and things they struggle with, I pointed out this budget to him to say, you know, look at what this, you know, relatively small municipality with relatively little opportunity for commercial and industrial tax-based growth has achieved, in my opinion, a high level of service, a well-funded asset management plan, and a 3.08% tax increase, and that I thought that was very, very reasonable, and frankly, a lesson for some of the municipalities that contact him saying about the things they're struggling with and why they're struggling. And there's I suggest that there's very specific reasons that need to be scrutinized there, because the fact that a municipality is small doesn't necessarily mean that it can't deliver responsible services and budget, because look at this budget. So very happy to be here today and adopt this budget and keep the fuel in the plows, especially with the weather out lately, keep the ice in the arenas frozen, and keep the firefighters paid so that we can go on delivering the services that residents depend on at a responsible tax rate. Anyone else before I call the question? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And item 9.3C, report 2025-133 from the tax collector treasurer regarding the tax adjustments processed in 2025. Tax collector DeLuca.
Just like the report as presented on the agenda. I don't have any additional comments, but I'm open to questions.
Questions from council? Councillor Stewart.
Moved by Stewart, second by Grigg, that council receive report 2025-133 for information, and that council authorize a total of $74,884.96 for the write-off of taxes for section 357, post-roll amended notices and minutes of settlement processed in 2025 for the township, county, and school boards in the amount of $35,399.50, $27,552.86, and $11,932.60, respectively.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 9.4A, Legislative Services, Report 2025-129 from the Legislative Coordinator Deputy Clerk regarding 2025 Local Government Week. Deputy Clerk McLaughlin, is there anything you'd like to highlight for council there?
I just want to thank Jacob for helping prepare our Local Government Week activities, as well as the report that's in front of you, and also thank you to all staff and council who participated this year.
Thank you. Questions from council? Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, I mentioned in the report that Tempsford Public School participated. Is there any plans, or was there any participation from AJ Baker and Zorra Highland Park?
Yeah, so we are looking to schedule something in the new year with Zorra Highland Park. We did reach out to AJ Baker, but nothing is in the works as of yet.
So participation is largely dependent upon the teachers' enthusiasm for this
Correct.
program?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Do I have a mover?
Moved by Stewart, second by Gregg, that report 2025-129 from the legislative coordinator / deputy clerk be received and filed for information purposes only.
Is there any discussion? One of the best days of the year for me is when we either go to the schools or the kids come here, and this year was no exception. It was interesting because when they were here, I love the exercise, first of all, where they get, you know, the projects and a budget and not enough money to do it all, and the creativity, you know, that they use to try and resolve that issue is amazing. Also, they asked like loads of questions this time about what their options were and how they could try and do this, and some of the presentations they made were really, really interesting, and it was fascinating to me that staff put up on social media the plan for the new playground equipment, and some residents chimed in, you know, and were saying like, I don't think it should be like this, I don't think it should be like that, and what about this, and what about that? And I didn't, but I was really tempted to chime in and say, you know, we literally had the gallery in council chambers full of the absolute target audience for this playground equipment, and they grilled recreation staff on, you know, well, what about this? Could we swap out this part for that part? And what about this and this and this? And there was a million questions and suggestions. And if I'm not mistaken, I think almost every single suggestion that they made has been incorporated in the final. And so it was really interesting to me that, you know, we made that effort to engage with those specific people who would actually be physically on the equipment and what they did and didn't want. And they told us what they wanted and they were getting it. An amazing day from a, you know, government relations with our residents and our youngest residents and future councillors, but also like it literally fed into discussions on service level and how they're going to get that equipment. So amazing and excellent, and I loved it, and thank you. Anyone else before I call the question? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 9.4B, report 2025-111 from the Director of Corporate and Protective Services regarding 2026 municipal election. Director Martin, is there anything you want to highlight?
No, thank you.
Questions from council? Do I have a mover? Councillor Finch.
Moved by Councillor Finch, seconded by Councillor Mitchell, that report 2025-111 from Director of Corporate and Protective Services be received and filed for information purposes only.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 9.4C, report 2025-132 from the Strategic Initiatives Coordinator regarding inclusion charter action items and updates for the Safe and Well plan. Coordinator Sukraj, is there anything you want to highlight for council?
Not at this time, but happy to answer any questions.
Questions from council? Do I have a mover? Councillor Finch.
Moved by Councillor Finch, seconded by Councillor Mitchell, that report 2025-132 from Strategic Initiatives Coordinator be received and filed for information purposes only.
Is there any discussion? Very happy to see the progress on this. It's amazing. Really, really happy to see that we went from, you know, in a relatively short period of time from adopting this as sort of a kind of aspirational goals to actually things done. Really happy to see a lot of green in that report. Anybody else before I call the question? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 9.4C, report, 9.4D, report 2025-125 from the Deputy Clerk, Legislative Coordinator regarding Boundary Road agreements. Deputy Clerk McLaughlin, is there anything you would like to highlight for council there?
Nope, I'll leave it open for questions.
Questions from council? Councillor Mitchell.
I apologize, Maggie. I didn't send you this question before because I just thought of it this morning. This is a change in what we've done before, in that I think before the entire Cobble Hills Road was shared between Thames Centre and Zorra Township. Now part of it is shared and the other part is Middlesex County is going to take care of it all, and they're going to send us a bill. But at the last line of the report was, for future negotiations, township staff have requested that Oxford County Public Works staff be included, with the desire that Middlesex County and Oxford County will upload Cobble Hills Road in its entirety from Road 68 to Elginfield Road, so basically Highway 7 to Highway 2. The contracts that are before us are for 10 years, but I believe in there, either side can give 6 months' notice. So is that where this negotiation comes in? That if that goes forward, Zorra Township may not be involved in this? And as I say, I apologize for not asking this before, but...
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so that's the goal, maybe not in the distant future, but to get Zorra Township out of Cobble Hills Road, and would be good, because Cobble Hills Road has a number of issues that would be nice that the county took care of.
I mean, somebody's going to have to deal with it.
If it could maybe, yeah. I'm just wondering, the mechanism is there. We're signing a 10-year contract, but 6 months, so we're not tying ourselves in. So.
Any other questions? Do I have a mover? Councillor Finch.
Moved by Councillor Finch, seconded by Councillor Mitchell, that report 2025-125 from Deputy Clerk and Legislative Coordinator be received for information, and that Council pass bylaw 5225 and 5325 to enter into an agreement with Middlesex County and the municipality of Thames Centre, respectively, for the purpose of a boundary road agreement.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And no correspondence requiring direction. Boards and committees, 11A, Upper Thames River Conservation Authority Board update from Board Member Mitchell.
Okay, the November 25th board meeting of the Upper Thames was probably one of the most unusual meetings I've ever been to, because the main agenda item was the impending demise of the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority. The last time I reported to council, I talked a bit about the October 31st announcement from the Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, where the plan is to create a new level of bureaucracy and amend the Conservation Act by creating the Ontario Provincial Conservation Agency, and that agency is responsible for reducing the number of conservation authorities in Ontario from 36 to 7. So I'm going to touch on a few major points here, but I would urge the rest of council and anyone else who's interested in this issue to check out the Upper Thames website, the porthole for Board of Directors meetings. There's an excellent report on the agenda about this issue, and there's also in the recording of the meeting a presentation by the General Manager, Tracy Annett, with more information on there. But even going through that, those presentations, there's more questions than answers about this. The intent here from the provincial government is to centralize control under the Ontario Provincial Conservation Agency and the ministry. There was no consultation with conservation authorities before this announcement was made. Conservation authorities were given 1 hour notice before the news conference. There was, is unclear who will provide funding during the transition, also for future capital projects or ongoing capital projects, or core and discretionary services. The new agency will be given the power to charge fees. It's unclear whether those fees will be going to existing conservation authorities or directly to municipalities. The timeline for this transition is the next municipal elections in October 2026, so 1 year to get this all changed over. As far as locally, the Upper Thames Rivers Conservation Authority will be amalgamated with Essex Region, Lower Thames, St. Clair Region, Kettle Creek, Catfish Creek, Long Point, and Grand River to form the Lake Erie Regional Conservation Authority. And it basically covers the entire north shore of Lake Erie, except for the very eastern tip. The northeastern corner reaches from Shelburne. The southwest corner is Windsor. And if you draw a straight line between those 2 points, that is slightly over 300 kilometers. So that the area is huge. It includes 81 municipalities, and currently there are 17 in the Upper Thames. But more so, it includes, they're now in the Upper Thames, 3 cities, London, Woodstock, and Stratford. This new Regional Conservation Authority would include a total of 12 cities, including Brantford, Cambridge, Guelph, Hamilton, Kitchener, London, Sarnia, St. Thomas, Stratford, Waterloo, Windsor, and Woodstock. There are currently 3 towns in the Upper Thames, Ingersoll, St. Mary's, and what's the other one? Anyway, there's 3. That will be increased to 18 towns, which includes a little town of Milton, which actually has a population of 133,000, even though it's still called a town. There will be a board of directors for each of the conservation authority. The size and composition of that board is to be determined, but I think you can see when there's 12 cities and 18 towns that it's going to be totally urban dominated. There may be 1 director for Oxford County at most. The impacts on Zorra, well, there will be loss of representation at the board level. There will be a disruption of services during the transition. Sandy Levin, who's one of our board members, was involved when the hospitals in London were combined under LHSC, and he said it took a good 5 years before all the bugs were worked out of the system and they got back to some level of efficiency. There will be a reduced level of services due to changes in priorities and staff, at least at our level. I haven't done a count, but I imagine there's several hundred little conservation areas the size of Embro and Harrington, so you can imagine where they're going to be on the priority list. There could be a change in the municipal levy. One of the 81 municipalities listed is not Oxford County. And in the Upper Thames, we are unique that our levy is paid through our county taxes. All the other municipalities pay through their local taxes. So unless Oxford County is added to this list and has a standing, it's quite potential that the full operating levy will be shifted from Oxford County's budget to the Zorra Township's budget. As far as what happened at the meeting, we had a long discussion about the impacts of this, and the consensus was that the province has no regard for Conservation Authority's input, and the fact that they didn't consult at all before. Any attempt to get more information by the conservation authorities has been largely unsuccessful. The board passed a motion asking the ministry to consult with conservation authorities and municipalities so that smaller size regional conservation authorities be formed rather than this monster size one that they're proposing. That motion and a letter from the general manager and chair of the Upper Thames were forwarded to the municipalities. Unfortunately, we did not receive that in time to have it included in this agenda. The meeting was only 1 day before the agenda deadline, but I have asked staff to include both of those in the agenda for our next meeting, along with the motion I'll be bringing forward that will support the position of the Upper Thames to ask for more consultation. Whether that will have any impact, I don't know at all. Our next meeting is the 17th. The deadline to have comments in is December 22nd. So as usual with provincial legislation changes, the consultation time is very brief. So the Upper Thames Board does not normally have a meeting in December. We have called another one, a special one for Tuesday, December the 16th, so the day before our next council meeting. I may have more information coming out of that, but if anybody has any questions as to what's happened so far, I'm open to do the best I can to answer.
Questions? I have a question. The Tuesday, December 16th meeting is a special meeting, did you say?
Yeah, it's what to say. We don't normally have a meeting in December of the board, but we called one considering that this ongoing information leaking out or filtering out slowly, and if there's anything else that the board wants to do at that meeting.
Okay. Right.
Tuesday, December 16th, 9:30.
I just, to add to Councillor Mitchell's comments there as information for council, the warden of Oxford County sent a letter to Upper Thames and with expressing concern about this and what Upper Thames would do with reserves that have been funded by municipalities under the current governance structure and with the current, representation and therefore, confidence in that governance model and allocation of those reserves, and the same with that with respect to assets. So that'll be probably at the December 16th meeting. It'll be on their agenda. Oxford County Council also received a report last week regarding Bill 60 in general and conservation authorities in particular as well, and has undertaken to advocate on this. I say that just so the council knows what's going on. Anyone else on this one? All right. Then 12, information items A, B, and C. Anybody have any questions on those, or do I have a mover to deal with any one or all of those? Councillor Finn.
Moved by Councillor Finch, seconded by Councillor Mitchell, that items 12A through C be received and filed for information purposes only.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And no unfinished business, no notices of motion. So I think what I have is bylaws, calendar closed. So bylaws, do I have anybody mover for Councillor Finch?
Moved by Councillor Finch, seconded by Councillor Mitchell, that bylaws 5225, 5325, and 5425 be taken read a first, second, and third time and finally passed. And further, that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign and affix the corporate seal thereto.
Any discussion? Did we miss 5125? You have 5125, okay. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And I guess another bylaw one.
Moved by Stewart, seconded by Gregg, that bylaw 5125 be taken as read a first, second, and third time and finally passed, and further that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign the same and affix the corporate seal thereto.
Is there any discussion? Councillor Mitchell.
I'm going to make the, I think, unprecedented move and vote against a bylaw. I voted against the first draft of this budget. I voted against the second draft of this budget, so to be consistent, I haven't changed my opinion, my position in the last 2 weeks. Not because it's a terrible budget. I think there was a couple of things we could have taken out. Would it decrease the levy increase by maybe 1%, but I agree with most of what the mayor said earlier, that this is a fairly responsible budget. But as I have talked about in previous meetings, there is a capital project in there that I don't support. And I know we're beyond the point where we're going to debate the budget or debate the merit of that project, but I just want to explain why I'm doing this very unusual thing. And that's because that capital project will result in approximately 2.7% in development charges on residential construction, and I don't see and I can't support why increasing the cost of housing, which development charges do, goes along with our stated goals to provide housing that is affordable to as many people as possible. As I say, I'm not trying to open debate or anything, but I always feel it's important that when a member of council votes in a contrary way to how the issue is going, that rather than just raising their hands, that they explain the reason for that vote.
Any other discussion? Deputy Mayor.
I just have a question. The motion is for the bylaw. Can you just give me 1 second to catch up in my head? is the bylaw for the budget as presented, correct? Okay. And so, Councillor Mitchell, you're speaking to opposing the bylaw, not is it a deferral that you're seeking?
No, I'm not. All I'm doing is explaining why I'm going to vote against a bylaw. Nobody ever votes against a bylaw. I'm not trying to open debate or anything. I'm just saying, if I did not support the budget, this is just another stage in the budget process. If I didn't support the budget earlier, I can't support the bylaw. I know it's going to pass. I'm not trying to create any controversy. I'm just saying that's why how I'm voting. I don't think it needs to go any further than that. It's still a vote. We're still voting, which means that you can vote for it, you can vote against it. Nobody ever votes against a bylaw. I am in this situation for the reasons I just said.
We can vote for or against or to defer any decision. So I guess my question was it a deferral? Because to vote against a bylaw for budget, like, we're still seeking to have a budget. So if you're voting against okay. I'm just trying to understand. Because if it's to vote against it, like, we still need to have a budget to proceed with administering services. So if it's in relation to something specific in the budget, my question is, would it then be a deferral versus an opposition to the bylaw? Like, I guess my concern is if we don't pass a bylaw in this vote, and maybe that's a question for staff, if we don't pass a bylaw in this vote and it's a failed vote as opposed to a deferral, what would that then mean for January 1st?
So we wouldn't have an approved budget for January 1st?
Councillor Mitchell.
I have no concern that the budget bylaw is not going to pass and it's going to interfere with the ongoing operations. The first draft passed 4-1. The second draft passed 4-1. I expect this is going to pass 4-1. I just felt that I could not, in good conscience, for the reasons I have expressed in the last two meetings, support this budget. And so it's, even though this is in some ways a formality, in other ways it's not. It's still a vote. And as I said, I think when a representative disagrees with something and they vote against it, it should be involved more than just putting up their hand. So that's what I'm doing. I don't think that this is going to interfere with anything towards budget. I'm just making a personal statement of my position.
Anyone else? I haven't consulted with experts on this, but certainly my opinion has always been, when it comes to bylaws, that the question before council is, does this bylaw accurately reflect previous decisions of council? It's not adoption of the bylaw is not a redebate, a do-over, a reconsideration formally of a previous decision of council. It's a question of, does this bylaw accurately reflect the previous policy decisions, resolutions that council adopted? And so to my mind, then, that is the question before council, not a redebate. I mean, the other thing is, to me, that this budget is a totality of all the services that we deliver and all the fees that we collect and all the taxes that we levy to deliver those services. And I am confident that I know there's at least one other member of council that considered bringing changes forward to this budget but didn't. And if that member of council voted against the budget because they didn't get what they want, that would be two voting against the budget because it's not everything they want. I wouldn't be so confident that everybody would vote to pass the budget. I'm frankly tempted to not endorse the budget bylaw just to see where things would go then if we don't adopt the budget today and see, so what do we do now? What is the change that we would make to this before we adopt it? I think there's ample opportunity for every member of council to bring forward changes to the budget. We all went through that process. We debate those changes. And at a certain point, we have to take the responsibility to say, are we going to freeze the ice in the arena? Are we going to put fuel in the plow? Are we going to pay the firefighters? And we've had those debates about what changes we want to make to service levels that would impact the levy or fees or et cetera. But I guess we'll see when we call the vote who votes which way. Any other discussion before I call the question? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And then we have items of community interest in the calendar. Councillor Finch.
December 6th at 6 p.m., the Embro and Zorra Agricultural Society is putting on the Santa Claus Parade. And afterwards, the Knox United Church is having a meet and greet with Santa and charity bake sale.
Anyone else? Councillor Mitchell.
Next Wednesday, December the 10th, 7:30 p.m., Wisdom Wednesday at Brown's Church is Christmas music with the St. Mary's Bell Ringers.
Anyone else? Deputy Mayor.
It was said earlier in the meeting, but just a reminder, light up the museum at Beachville District Museum this Friday, starting at 6:30 p.m.
Anyone else? Motion to go into closed. Councillor Mitchell.
Moved by Councillor Mitchell, seconded by Councillor Finch. The council move into closed meeting session at 11:40 a.m. Pursuant to Section 239.2B, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 11:50, and we are back from closed, and all we have left is confirmatory and adjournment. Do I have a mover? Councillor Mitchell.
Moved by Councillor Mitchell, seconded by Councillor Finch, that bylaw 55-25, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council held December 3rd, 2025, be read a first, second, and third time this December the 3rd, 2025. And further, that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign the same and affix a corporate seal thereto.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And motion to adjourn. Councillor Mitchell.
Moved by Councillor Mitchell, seconded by Councillor Finch, that this session of council be now adjourned and herewith closed at 11:52 a.m. And at the next meeting of council be called for December 17th, 2025 at 6 p.m. in the council chambers at the Zorra Municipal Center.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried, and we are adjourned.